Life has a way of etching truths into us, sometimes in the form of wrinkles, sometimes in the shape of scars. We often forget that behind every mark is a story of survival, of choices made when fear could have paralyzed but courage pushed forward. Too often, people see only the surface. They whisper, they judge, they turn pain into spectacle. But scars, if you know how to read them, are not signs of weakness. They are proof of strength, proof that someone stood in fire and carried others out. This is the story of a woman who bore her scars not for herself, but for those who might never have lived without her. She did not ask for recognition. She did not seek pity. Yet one cruel remark inside a small-town diner would awaken a tide of gratitude so powerful it shook the walls of silence around her. What began as mockery ended in honor, and it is a reminder of what it truly means to serve, to endure, and to rise above judgment. Stay with me, because what unfolds here will stay with you long after the final word. And if this story speaks to you, don't forget to follow along, and share your thoughts. It's how we keep stories like this alive. The diner always smelled of coffee before the sun rose. It was a place that carried the faint hum of refrigerators, the squeak of shoes on freshly mopped linoleum, and the clink of metal spoons stacked in neat rows. Maria Torres moved through that world with the ease of someone who knew every creak in the floorboards. She flicked on the neon sign, straightened the napkin holders, and wiped down the booths, her movements deliberate but never sluggish. For her, the diner wasn't just work. It was a shield. The small-town routine kept her from the unpredictable outside world, a world that had already left its mark on her in the most permanent way possible. When the first customers arrived, truckers from the interstate, men who lived on black coffee and eggs over easy, Maria greeted them with a steady voice. They looked at her the way they always did, with a quick gnawing, a muttered morning, and eyes that flicked past her scars but never lingered. Regulars knew better than to stare. They understood, in the way working men do, that life sometimes hands out wounds that can't be hidden. The scars traveled across Maria's right temple, down her neck, and along her arm. They caught the light when she leaned over the counter, pale lines against her warm brown skin. For years, those marks had made her a stranger in her own reflection. But in the diner, with its chipped mugs and constant chatter, she could almost forget. By 6, the place was alive with noise. A pair of mechanics debated baseball scores, a mother soothed her toddler with pancakes, and a college student hunched over textbooks in the corner. It was the kind of ordinary chaos Maria cherished. Then the door jingled, and 3 men in pressed shirts and polished shoes strode in, corporate travelers. They carried the air of people who had never worked with their hands, men used to giving orders, not taking them. They chose the corner booth and spread out like they owned the room. Maria approached with her pad in hand. "Morning, gentlemen. Coffee?" 2 nodded absently, scrolling through their phones. The third, a broad man with thinning blonde hair and a smirk that came too easily, looked her over with open disdain. His eyes lingered not on the menu, but on the scars etched across her face. "Guess they'll hire anyone here," he said, loudly enough for half the diner to hear. "Shouldn't someone like you be in the back? Customers don't want to see that." The words fell like a brick through glass. Conversations halted. Forks froze midair. The college student lifted his eyes. The mechanics stiffened, their jaws tightening. Even the toddler stopped babbling. Maria felt her throat tighten, but she forced herself to remain still. She had been stared at, whispered about, even avoided. But this open cruelty, cut deeper. Not because it was new, but because it came so casually, as if her existence was an inconvenience. She steadied her voice, though it trembled with restrained anger. "I've served people like you in places far worse than this, and I'll keep doing my job, scars and all." The man's smirk faltered. He shifted in his seat, but before he could answer, silence pressed heavy around them. The diner was waiting, watching. Maria turned and poured theirs coffee as if nothing had happened. But the moment was not forgotten. At the counter, one of the truckers, a man with sun-leathered skin, quietly pulled a 20 from his wallet, placed it under his half-empty mug, and left without another word. It wasn't abandonment, it was protest. The college student followed with a smaller bill, eyes down but jaw set. An older veteran, recognizable by the faded cap he always wore, stayed. He finished his plate, then approached the register. Instead of his usual few dollars, he laid down a 50. His hand lingered just long enough for Maria to understand. Solidarity doesn't always need words. Maria met his eyes, and for the first time that morning, she felt something shift. It wasn't comfort. It wasn't triumph. It was the reminder that even in moments of cruelty, dignity could not be stolen from her. The rest of the shift passed in a blur. Plates clattered, coffee poured, laughter returned, but Maria's mind kept circling the man's words. Long after they left, she felt the burn of their echo. And yet, beneath that sting was something steadier, the awareness that others had seen, others had silently chosen her side. When she locked up at 2 in the afternoon, sunlight pouring across the lot, Maria paused at the diner's doorway. She pressed her fingers to the scarred skin along her jaw. She thought of the desert heat, the sound of mortars, the split-second decisions that had led to these marks. People could laugh or mock or turn away, but they would never know what it had cost her to carry those scars and what it had cost her to survive. Maria exhaled, squared her shoulders, and walked to her truck. Tomorrow she would return. Tomorrow she would serve coffee again. And tomorrow, though she could not yet know it, the diner would no longer be the same quiet refuge it had been for years. Something had been set in motion. What began with cruelty was about to awaken a tide of remembrance, gratitude, and honor she had never asked for, but could no longer avoid. Maria's apartment was simple, 2 rooms above an old hardware store, with creaking stairs that carried the sound of every step. On the wall near the door hung a faded calendar with penciled-in shifts. A kettle sat on the stove, worn at the handle, and beside it, a shoebox tucked carefully into the corner of a shelf. She almost never opened it. Inside were medals she had been handed years earlier, medals she had accepted with polite nods but never displayed. That night, she did open it. The Purple Heart glinted faintly under the yellow lamp, its ribbon pressed flat as if it hadn't been touched in years. She held it, felt its weight, and then set it back down with care. It was easier to bury reminders than to live in their shadow. The scars were enough reminder. She had earned them in 2010, serving with Bravo 17 in Iraq. Her role was logistics and field medicine, work that often placed her between danger and duty. She was the one who made sure supplies reached the men who needed them most. And when things fell apart, she was the one who wrapped tourniquets and carried stretchers. She had never thought of herself as fearless. In truth, she was terrified most of the time. But fear never kept her still. The day everything changed began with dust storms whipping across the horizon. They had been moving in convoy, routine supply, to an outpost, when the first mortar round landed too close. The sound was deafening, a crack that made the ground lurch. Then came fire, smoke, and screaming. Maria remembered dragging Corporal Hayes from the wreckage of a burning vehicle, his uniform charred, his breathing shallow. She remembered hearing someone else crying out, trapped beneath twisted metal. Her hands shook, but she forced herself forward. A second blast struck before she reached them. Shrapnel ripped into her side and arm, the force slamming her into the ground. Heat seared her flesh, leaving jagged burns that would never fade. Even so, she crawled forward. With one good arm, she pulled a Marine free, dragging him across sand that burned like coals. The smell of fuel and scorched fabric clung to her for days after. When she finally woke in a field hospital, she was told she had saved multiple lives. Some called it heroism. She didn't believe that. For Maria, it had been instinct. She couldn't have done otherwise. Heroism was something you prepared for. She had only reacted. Recovery was long. Grafts, surgeries, months of pain that blurred into one another. She came home with scars she couldn't hide, even if she wanted to. At first, she thought people would see them as proof of survival. Instead, she learned how quickly strangers averted their eyes. Interviews ended abruptly when managers caught sight of the right side of her face. The world had a way of treating wounds as something shameful rather than something endured. Work was hard to find until Eleanor offered her a place at the diner. Eleanor was a sharp-eyed woman in her 60s, someone who didn't ask unnecessary questions. She only asked if Maria could move quickly, handle customers, and keep calm when things got loud. Maria answered yes. That was enough. The diner became her refuge. The hiss of the griddle, the smell of butter on toast, the steady rhythm of pouring coffee, it was all grounding. Customers might notice her scars, but here she wasn't dismissed for them. Here she could belong. And yet, there were reminders that never left her. When Marines passed through town on leave, sometimes in uniform, sometimes not, Maria noticed. She saw the patches on their jackets, the way they stood straighter than civilians, the way their laughter carried a certain edge. She slipped them extra bacon, an extra refill of coffee, or a slice of pie on the house. She never told them why. She didn't need to. One afternoon, a group of base kids, barely old enough to shave, came in for breakfast. They were loud, joking, teasing each other over scrambled eggs and hash browns. They reminded her of the men she had once patched up. Before they left, Maria quietly boxed up muffins for them. "For the road," she said simply. They grinned, thanked her, and left. She never told them she had once been one of the last faces a Marine saw before being loaded onto a helicopter. At night, memories returned. She would lie in bed, listening to the hum of cars outside, and recall voices that no longer lived. Private First Class Delaney, who had joked about opening a bar back home. Sergeant Martinez, who wrote letters to his sister every night. Some made it back, some did not. She carried all of them. Her scars, then, were not accidents of flesh. They were maps of places where courage and fear collided. Every line carved into her skin was a moment she had chosen to act when freezing might have been easier. To Maria, they were private memorials. That was why the man's cruel words at the diner stung so deeply. Not because she cared what he thought, but because those scars carried lives within them. To dismiss them was to dismiss the people who had lived because of them. She remembered sitting at her small kitchen table after that shift, staring at her hands. The same hands that had tied makeshift bandages in desert heat now shook as they held a chipped mug. She pressed her fingers to the ridge on her cheek, tracing it slowly, almost defiantly. "I carried them out," she whispered to herself, as if reminding her own reflection. "And I'll carry this." Maria never wanted pity. She never wanted headlines. She wanted quiet, steady work. She wanted mornings where the loudest sound was a coffee pot percolating, not the scream of mortar shells. But she could not erase what had been carved into her body, nor did she want to. In the small town, people respected her in unspoken ways. The regulars never asked about the past, but their eyes softened when she passed by. Parents told their children not to stare. The older vet at the counter always nodded once, a silent acknowledgement between soldiers. The scars meant sacrifice. They meant survival. They meant she had chosen to risk her life so others might live. And though Maria rarely spoke of it, though she tucked her medals away, the truth lived in every step she took across the diner floor. That truth was about to be seen again, in a way she never expected. For the past, no matter how deeply buried, always finds its way back. The diner never slept for long. Even when Maria closed the doors at 2 and wiped down the counters, by dawn it came alive again. The smell of bacon, the clatter of silverware, the murmurs of conversation starting fresh. For her, it was rhythm, not routine. Rhythm meant she could breathe. Rhythm meant she could silence the poem, at least for a little while. But sometimes the past slipped through, unexpected, like a note folded neatly beneath a cup. It was a Thursday morning when a group of young Marines wandered in, still carrying the raw edges of boot camp in their posture. Their haircuts gave them away, their fresh energy too. They were loud, laughing at jokes only they understood, the kind of banter that belonged to people who hadn't yet seen the worst of the world, but would soon enough. Maria served them with the same calm she offered everyone. She refilled their mugs without asking, slid plates onto the table with practiced ease, and smiled faintly when one of them teased another for eating his eggs too quickly. They reminded her of boys she had once patched up in dust and smoke, boys who had trusted her hands even when her own were trembling. When they finished, the group rose in a shuffle of boots and laughter. One of them lingered at the counter to pay. Another, quieter, glanced at Maria, then down at his plate. He fumbled with his wallet, hesitated, and finally left something small and folded beneath his coffee cup. After they left, Maria cleared the booth. She picked up plates, stacked forks, and finally lifted the mug. That was when she saw it, a napkin, creased in half. She unfolded it with care. The handwriting was hurried, uneven, but clear enough. "Thanks for saving our captain. Recognized you from his photo, PFC Reynolds, B-17. Maria froze. Her breath caught in her throat. Her eyes moved over the words again, slower this time. Reynolds, Bravo 17. The room blurred. She sat at the booth, napkin trembling in her hand, heart pounding in her chest. It had been years since anyone spoke of that day, years since she had allowed herself to remember it beyond what the scars forced her to. And now here was a boy, just a boy, who carried the memory forward. She folded the napkin carefully and slipped it into her apron pocket. She didn't tell anyone. She didn't need to. It was hers, a secret reminder that what she had carried wasn't forgotten. That evening, when she sat in her small apartment, she unfolded the napkin again under the lamplight. She smoothed it flat on the table, her fingers tracing the letters as if they might vanish if she let go. She thought of Reynolds, how young he must have been then, maybe only a child when she bled in that desert. And yet he knew. He remembered through the stories of others. Maria tucked the napkin into the shoebox with her medals, placing it gently on top. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like the box held relics of someone else's life. It held continuity, proof that her scars were not just private memorials. They were living bridges to others. A week later, the insult at the diner came. The cruel words that tried to reduce her to nothing more than damaged skin. And while the sting lingered, so did the memory of that napkin, the knowledge that somewhere out there, people remembered her not with disgust, but with gratitude. Still, the atmosphere in the diner shifted. The regulars, loyal as they were, carried a new tension in their eyes. They glanced toward the corner booth where the three corporate men had sat, as if expecting them to return. Eleanor, noticing Maria's stiffness, offered gently, "You don't have to take their table if they come back. I'll handle them." Maria shook her head. "No, I'll finish the job. I always finish the job." The words came out steady, but inside she carried the heaviness of that moment like fresh shrapnel. It wasn't just about her. It was about every soldier who had come home bearing marks no one else could understand. To hide, to retreat would be to betray that unspoken fraternity. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that word of the incident had already begun to spread. One of the truckers who left that morning had a son in the reserves. He told him about the waitress with the scarred face, the one who stood her ground after being insulted. That son shared it with his unit. Stories traveled, threads connecting people who had never met her but knew her in spirit. Reynolds, too, had told others. His napkin had not been an isolated gesture. He had gone back to base and told his comrades, "She's alive, the one they told us about. I saw her. She's still here." From there, the story gained momentum. Calls were made. Emails passed between Marines who had once bled under the same flag. Men and women scattered across the country suddenly remembered a medic who had pulled them from fire. A woman they had not seen since, but who had left her imprint on their survival. Maria moved through the next days unaware. She opened the diner, poured coffee, wiped counters. She carried her scars with the same quiet dignity. She thought the incident would fade, that the cruel remark would be buried beneath the noise of daily life. But the past was already on its way to meet her again. The first sign came quietly. On a gray morning when the air smelled faintly of rain, Maria arrived at the diner to find a small group standing across the street. At first, she thought they were early customers waiting for the doors to open. But as she unlocked the front door and turned on the lights, she saw the uniforms. They weren't full dress, not yet, just jackets, caps, patches that spoke of service. She felt a prickle at the back of her neck. Something was moving. Something had been set in motion that could not be undone. Inside, as she set the first pots of coffee to brew, she pressed her hand against the apron pocket where she had once tucked that napkin. She remembered Reynolds, his uneven scrawl, his quiet thanks. She whispered to herself, almost a prayer, "Don't let this be about me. Let it be about them." Because Maria had never sought recognition. She had carried her scars not as trophies, but as testaments to lives that still walked the earth because she had not stopped moving in fire. But recognition was coming anyway, walking steadily toward the diner in boots and medals, drawn by bonds that time could not sever. By dawn the next day, the line had grown longer, and Maria's life, once so ordinary in its rhythm, was about to shift forever. The air that morning carried a kind of stillness Maria rarely noticed. The sun was only beginning to lift over the horizon, casting a pale orange wash across the diner's parking lot. She turned the key in the lock, pushed open the door, and flipped on the neon sign as she had done 1,000 times before. The smell of disinfectant from the night's cleaning still clung faintly to the booths, but outside she felt eyes on her. She turned briefly toward the street and saw them, a cluster of figures waiting quietly, not impatient, not fidgeting like customers eager for breakfast. They stood straight, shoulders squared, the weight of service written in their posture. Some wore jackets with unit patches. One or two had caps embroidered with years and campaigns. She knew that stance. Once you carried yourself that way, you never lost it. Maria swallowed hard, her hands tightening around the keys. She wanted to believe they were just passers-by, maybe veterans from the neighborhood. But when she stepped inside and began brewing the first pots of coffee, her heart beat with the certainty that something was different. By 6, the bell over the door chimed. A man stepped in, tall and weathered, hair gone silver at the temples. His uniform was gone, replaced by civilian clothes, but his bearing was unmistakable. He walked with the calm of someone who had seen chaos and survived it. He slid into a booth without ceremony. Maria approached, pad in hand, her voice steady. "Coffee." He looked up at her, and his eyes softened with recognition. Black, just like before. Her breath caught. "Do I know you?" The man nodded slowly. "You probably don't remember me, but I remember you. Captain Harlow, you pulled me out, did the second blast. Bravo 17. Maria's hand trembled. She set the pot down gently, afraid it might slip. The name, the voice, it was like opening a locked door in her memory. She saw again the twisted wreckage, the fire, the weight of a body across her shoulders as her own arm bled. She had dragged him, not even sure if he was alive. And here he was, alive, looking at her across a diner booth years later. He reached into his pocket and unwrapped a piece of green cloth, edges frayed from years of being folded. Inside was a medallion, Bravo 17's insignia. He laid it on the table between them. "This doesn't belong to me anymore," he said quietly. "It belongs to you. We're here because of what you did. I never got to say thank you." Maria stared at the medallion. The air seemed to thicken around her. She wanted to push it back, to insist she had only done her job. But before she could speak, the door chimed again. 2 more entered, then 3. One carried a small envelope, another a coin, another a folded letter. Each of them approached her with the same expression. Not pity, not curiosity, but reverence. They moved with patience, forming a quiet line by the counter. Outside, the line stretched longer. Cars parked along the curb. Men and women in plain clothes, some with canes, some with prosthetics, all carrying something small in their hands. Maria's breath grew shallow. She backed up, gripping the counter for balance. Eleanor arrived then, coat still half-buttoned, stopping in her tracks when she saw the crowd inside. Her eyes widened, flicking between Maria and the uniformed strangers. "What on earth is happening?" Eleanor whispered. Maria shook her head, unable to answer. One by one, the visitors approached. A young woman with cropped hair and strong shoulders placed a coin on the counter. "You don't know me, but you saved my cousin. He said your hands never shook." An older man, bent at the waist, leaned on a cane as he laid down a letter. His voice cracked. "My grandchildren are here because you didn't give up on me." Each gift was small, patches, coins, handwritten notes, but the weight of them was unbearable. Maria kept trying to speak, but her throat closed. Tears burned at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them away, refusing to break in front of so many. She did the only thing she knew how to do. She kept working. She poured coffee into cups, carried plates, cleared tables. The diner, usually a place of chatter, was filled with a hush broken only by the scrape of chairs and the murmur of voices thanking her. But she could not keep the tear back forever. When Captain Harlow lifted his cup and said softly, "Because of you, my children grew up with a father," the dam inside her cracked. Her hand went to her mouth and her shoulders shook. The older veteran at the counter, the one who always tipped heavy, patted her hand gently. "It's all right," he said. "Let it come." Outside, more arrived. The line wrapped the block, people waiting patiently as if it were a pilgrimage. Some carried nothing but their presence. which was gift enough. By noon, the diner was overflowing. Neighbors pressed against the glass windows, trying to understand why so many gathered. A local trucker, the same one who had walked out in protest days before, pulled out his phone and recorded the scene. A room filled with veterans, a waitress with scarred skin quietly serving them, and tokens of gratitude piling on the counter. That clip traveled quickly. By evening, media vans idled near the curb, cameras ready, though none could capture the full gravity of what had taken place. Maria, meanwhile, tried to slip away into the kitchen, but Captain Harlow followed, his voice firm. "You deserve this, Torres. You carried us then. Let us carry this now." She shook her head. "I just did my duty." "No," Harlow said, meeting her eyes. "You lived it, and we never forgot." The words struck deep. She realized then that the napkin left by Reynolds had not been an isolated spark. It had been the beginning of a fire carried forward by those who owed her their lives. Eleanor, standing at the doorway, whispered in awe, "They're here for you. All of them." Maria pressed her scarred hand against the cool metal of the counter, grounding herself. She thought of the long years when her scars had been cause for avoidance, when strangers had looked away as if she were a reminder of something they'd rather not see. Now those same scars were proof, visible, undeniable proof of sacrifice that had saved others. She did not want recognition, but recognition had come, and it was not a spotlight. It was a river flowing steady, filled with the faces of those who remembered. By the time the sun dipped low that evening, Maria sat at the corner booth, surrounded by tokens piled high. Coins, patches, letters, a medallion wrapped in green cloth, and in every gift, one message echoed, "We lived because you did not stop." Maria closed her eyes, her hand resting over the pile, and for the first time in years, she let herself feel it. Not guilt, not shame, but belonging. And outside the diner, the line of gratitude still stretched on, waiting patiently, refusing to let the day end until every voice had spoken. The days that followed felt unreal, as though Maria had stepped into someone else's life. The diner, once a quiet corner of the town, had become a gathering place that pulsed with stories. Stories carried back to her like echoes she had never expected to hear. Every hour brought another face, another memory, another fragment of the past that returned in flesh and voice. On a Tuesday morning, the bell above the door jingled, and a young man stepped inside. He moved awkwardly, one leg replaced with a sleek metal prosthetic. His eyes scanned the room until they landed on Maria. His smile was small, hesitant, but steady. "You don't remember me," he began, voice soft. "But you tied a tourniquet on me when I thought I was done. I kept trying to make you laugh, to prove I was still alive. You just told me to shut up and let you work." The memory rose sharp in Maria's mind. The desert, the sand-soaked dark, her hands slick as she tightened fabric around a bleeding limb. She hadn't known if he would make it. Yet here he was, walking, limping, but alive. He slid into a booth and ordered black coffee. "Lost the leg, sure, but I lived. Got married last year. My wife told me I should find you, tell you thank you. I guess I should have done it sooner." Maria swallowed against the lump in her throat. She poured his coffee with hands that trembled just enough for him to notice. He didn't say anything about it. He only smiled wider, as if his very presence was proof enough of gratitude. Later that week, another figure arrived. An older man, shoulders stooped, moving with the aid of a cane. His hair was white now, but Maria knew the eyes. She had seen them once filled with pain, fixed on the ceiling of a field tent. He shuffled toward her, his cane tapping against the tiles. "Sergeant Major Lewis," he said, voice gravelly but strong. "You dragged me when you could barely stand yourself. I've got 3 grandchildren now. They wouldn't exist if you'd given up on me that day." He placed a small photograph on the counter. 3 smiling children, arms wrapped around each other, cheeks flushed with the glow of life. Maria's vision blurred as she picked it up. The scars on her hand trembled against the glossy paper. She whispered, "They're beautiful." "They're yours as much as mine," Lewis said. Then he left, leaving behind the photograph as if it belonged in her keeping. The stories kept coming, each one a piece of a mosaic she had never dared to assemble. Some were simple, a Marine who said she had spoken to him calmly as he bled, telling him he'd see the sunrise again. Another who remembered her carrying ammunition across open ground when no one else could move. Others carried depth that pierced her. Children born, families healed, futures lived because she had refused to stop. Amid this flood of gratitude, something unexpected happened. The man who had insulted her, the blonde traveler whose cruel words had sparked the chain of events, called the diner. Eleanor answered first, frowning as she listened, then handed the phone to Maria. On the other end, the man's voice was quieter than she remembered, stripped of arrogance. "I wanted to say I was wrong," he began. "I didn't know who you were. I didn't know what those scars meant." Maria's grip tightened on the receiver. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, "You didn't need to know. You only needed to choose not to be cruel." He was silent. Finally, he muttered, "I'm sorry." She didn't forgive the insult itself, not fully, but she accepted the apology as a small step forward. "Let it be a lesson," she said simply, then hung up. Later that evening, 3 crisp bills appeared in the veteran's donation jar, a quiet offering from the same travelers who had once mocked her. Maria funneled every cent into the fund, determined that even misguided guilt could be turned into help for others. The jar itself had become a symbol. What once held a few coins now overflowed with cash. Neighbors, strangers, even passing truckers dropped bills inside, whispering thanks as they did. Maria refused to keep a penny. Each donation went to veteran support programs, medical aid, scholarships. She saw it not as charity, but as an extension of the work she had begun years ago in the dust and fire. One night, as the diner quieted and the last customers left, Eleanor locked the door and sat across from Maria. She looked at her with the blunt honesty of a woman who had seen decades of life. "You know this isn't just about coffee anymore," Eleanor said. "These people aren't here for breakfast. They're here because you gave them something that can't be measured. You gave them tomorrow." Maria lowered her gaze, her hands twisting the rag she held. "I never wanted this attention." "I know," Eleanor said gently, "but sometimes the world decides it owes you, whether you asked for it or not." That night, Maria lay awake in her small apartment. On the shelf, the shoebox of medals sat open now, no longer hidden. The napkin from Reynolds lay atop the Purple Heart, joined by the photograph of Lewis's grandchildren. She stared at them under the dim light, her chest tight. For so long, she had believed the scars were only hers to bear. But now she saw they belonged to many, each line etched into her skin, connected to someone else's life. The town, too, began to change. Where once people glanced quickly away from her scars, they now looked with quiet respect. Parents brought children into the diner and spoke softly about courage, about sacrifice. High schoolers scribbled essays inspired by the story that had swept through their community. Even the local paper ran a headline: "Diner Waitress, War Hero, the Woman Who Saved Bravo 17." Maria cringed at the word hero, but she couldn't deny the truth that people wanted to hold on to. The moment that struck her most deeply came one Saturday morning. A young couple entered, carrying an infant swaddled in a blue blanket. The father's gait was uneven, one leg stiff from old wounds, but his smile was radiant. They approached her booth. The mother whispered, "This is our daughter. Her middle name is Torres. We wanted her to carry your name." Maria's breath faltered. She bent gently, touching the baby's tiny hand. The child's fingers curled around her scarred thumb, and in that fragile grip, Maria felt the weight of everything she had endured transform into something light. For once, the scars did not feel heavy. They felt purposeful. In the following weeks, stories multiplied, each one weaving Maria further into the fabric of lives she had once touched only briefly. Some brought tears, others laughter, but all carried the same message: that her actions had rippled outward far beyond what she had ever imagined. And slowly, Maria realized something profound. She had not just saved lives, she had planted futures. And now, those futures were walking back through her diner doors, one by one, carrying the proof of her sacrifice in their existence. The jar overflowed, the booths filled, the stories never ceased. And though Maria never sought the spotlight, she could no longer deny what had become clear. Her scars were not just marks of survival. They were living testimonies, etched in flesh, carried in gratitude, and remembered in generations yet to come. The call came on a quiet afternoon when the diner was nearly empty. Maria had just finished wiping down the counter when Eleanor brought her the receiver. her eyes unusually serious. "It's for you," Eleanor said softly. "He said his name is Harlow." Maria hesitated, her pulse quickening. She took the phone and pressed it to her ear. "Torres," the voice said firmly, still carrying the timbre of command despite the years. "It's Captain Harlow. We're organizing a gathering. It's long overdue. We want you there." Maria leaned against the counter, her grip tightening on the receiver. "I don't—" "You don't have to accept," Harlow interrupted. "But it isn't about formality, it's about acknowledgement. The unit has never forgotten what you did. We want you to stand with us again, this time not as a medic in the dust, but as the reason we're still standing." Silence stretched between them. Maria closed her eyes, hearing the weight of his words, the sincerity. At last, she exhaled. "When?" "Saturday night, the VFW hall. Bring nothing but yourself." The hall glowed with warm light as Maria entered that evening, her simple black dress falling straight against her frame. She had chosen not to cover her scars, for the first time in years, allowing them to be visible without apology. Her steps were slow, uncertain, until she looked up and saw the faces waiting. Nearly 200 people filled the room, men and women who had once worn the same uniform, some in wheelchairs, some leaning on crutches, others standing tall. As Maria crossed the threshold, the room rose to its feet in unison. The sound was not applause. It was the tap of coins and medallions striking tabletops, a rhythmic echo of respect used in military tradition. The sound reverberated through her chest, a low thunder of gratitude. She froze in place, overwhelmed. Eleanor, who had insisted on coming with her, gave her a gentle nudge. "Go on," she whispered. Maria took one step, then another, her eyes shimmering. Each face she passed carried something familiar. Men she had bandaged, women she had reassured, soldiers she had once believed she'd never see again. On the stage, Harlow waited. His shoulders had rounded with age, but his presence was as commanding as ever. When Maria reached him, he extended his hand. She clasped it, and he squeezed firmly. "Torres," he said, his voice carrying across the hall, "once upon a time, you pulled me from fire when you yourself were bleeding. Tonight we return the favor. We carry you into the light where you belong." A Marine stepped forward with a wooden shadow box. Inside was her Purple Heart, reframed, polished, mounted with care. Beside it sat a new citation, signed and sealed by the highest authority, recognizing her for valor beyond expectation. Maria's lips parted, but no words came. She shook her head slightly. "I didn't earn this. I only did what anyone would have done." Harlow shook his head, his voice steady. "No, Torres, you did what not everyone could do. You acted when others would have faltered. That's the measure of courage. Not absence of fear, but action in spite of it." The sergeant major from her unit stepped forward, his own scars visible beneath his suit. "We never forgot you," he said, "and tonight, you don't get to hide anymore. You carried us then. Let us carry you now." The room erupted in the rhythmic pounding of medallions again, the sound swelling like a heartbeat. Maria's hands trembled as she accepted the shadow box. She held it close to her chest as though afraid it might vanish. The ceremony continued, but for Maria, time blurred. One by one, soldiers approached her with stories. A man in his 40s told her about the night she had whispered that he would make it home, a promise she kept with her hands in bandages. A woman, eyes brimming, said Maria had been the one to carry her brother to safety. Then came a young couple. The man's uniform was gone, replaced by civilian clothes, but Maria recognized him immediately. The Marine whose leg she had saved with a tourniquet. His wife stood beside him, cradling a newborn. "This is our daughter," the wife said. "Her middle name is Torres. We wanted her to carry the name of the woman who gave us the chance to bring her into this world." Maria bent slowly, tears sliding down her cheeks as she touched the baby's tiny hand. The child's fingers curled instinctively around her scarred thumb, and Maria let out a sob she had held back for years. The room hushed, then softened into quiet smiles. Later, when speeches ended and the ceremony wound down, Harlow guided Maria outside for a breath of air. The night was cool, stars sharp against the dark sky. "You know why we called this gathering Scars That Served?" he asked. Maria shook her head, her shadow box pressed tightly against her chest. "Because scars are not wounds. They're proof of healing. They're proof that you gave more than you had to give, and still stood afterward. We wanted the world to see that yours are not blemishes. They are honor made flesh. Maria swallowed hard, unable to speak. She looked down at her arms, the lines and ridges of her skin illuminated by moonlight. For the first time in years, she did not feel the urge to cover them. She let them be seen. When she returned inside, she was greeted not with fanfare but with warmth. Soldiers clapped her on the back, families embraced her, children hugged her legs. The night became a blur of gratitude, laughter, and quiet tears. At the close of the evening, Harlow raised his glass. To Torres, for saving us, for saving futures we never thought we'd have, for proving that scars are not shame but survival. The hall echoed with voices, repeating her name, glasses lifted high. Maria, overwhelmed, simply bowed her head, pressing her hand over her heart. When she left the hall that night, Eleanor at her side, the shadow box in her arms, she felt lighter. Not because the burden was gone, it never would be, but because it was shared now. No longer hers alone to carry. The scars she had once believed marked her as broken had been transformed. They were now banners, carried proudly by everyone who had lived because of them. As Maria climbed into her truck, she glanced once more at the hall glowing behind her, filled with laughter and voices. She whispered softly to herself, "They finally see." And for the first time in years, Maria allowed herself to believe it. The diner's booths had always been covered in faded blue checkered fabric, worn smooth by years of elbows, spilled coffee, and conversations that came and went. For Maria, those booths had once been nothing more than the backdrop of her days, a place to pour coffee, deliver plates, and keep her head down. But now they had become something else entirely, a living archive. The wall above the corner booth was no longer bare. A brass plaque gleamed there now, fixed beneath a framed photograph of Maria taken years earlier in Iraq, her body bent, carrying a Marine out of smoke and fire. The picture had been pulled from unit archives, sent by Harlow himself. Beneath it, the plaque bore her words, the ones she had spoken quietly at the ceremony when pressed to describe her scars. "I never sought recognition. I only hoped they'd live long enough to live kindly." People stopped at that booth now, even when it wasn't open. Some placed coins beneath the frame. Others left letters. A few simply touched the wood, bowed their heads, and walked away. Maria worked as she always had, but her days now carried a different rhythm. Every Tuesday morning at 7, the back room filled with young Marines in training, notebooks balanced on their laps, faces attentive. Maria taught them field first aid, just as she once performed it under fire. "Knowledge weighs nothing," she told them, holding up a strip of fabric, "but it saves more lives than bullets." She demonstrated how to improvise a tourniquet, how to calm a panicked comrade, how to work with steady hands even when fear tried to drown you. Her scars became part of her teaching, proof that pain could be endured, that healing was possible. The recruits listened closely, not out of duty, but out of respect. Outside of the diner, ripples spread further. Local businesses, moved by her story, began adjusting their hiring practices. Employers who once hesitated to hire veterans with visible injuries now placed signs in their windows. "Veterans welcome." The stigma Maria had fought quietly for years began to crumble, one opportunity at a time. A scholarship was founded in her name, funded by donations that had once overflowed the jar at the counter. It paid for medical training for young men and women who wanted to follow the path of service in medicine. Maria insisted on anonymity at first, but the town refused. "It's yours," Eleanor said firmly. "You earned it." The city council even renamed the street that ran past the diner, an honorary title, Torres Way. The sign gleamed beneath the streetlight, a constant reminder to anyone passing that courage had once walked these sidewalks quietly, without asking for praise. But perhaps the most profound moment came when Harlow, now retired, visited her one evening. He carried with him a letter sealed in an official envelope. "They want to include your story in Marine leadership training," he explained. "Not just as a tale of bravery, but as a lesson about what it means to act without waiting for recognition, about how scars can lead as much as medals." Maria hesitated, holding the envelope as though it might burn her fingers. "It shouldn't be about me." Harlow shook his head. "It isn't just about you. It's about every medic, every soldier, every quiet soul who served without fanfare. You're just the one carrying it forward for all of them. She opened the letter that night at her kitchen table, the same table where she had once stared at her hands and whispered reminders to herself. This time she didn't whisper. She simply read the words and allowed herself a small, quiet smile. Years passed and still Maria returned to the diner every morning. Still she brewed the first pots of coffee, wiped down the booths, straightened the napkin holders. But now she did so with the knowledge that her scars were not a burden to be hidden, but a legacy to be carried. On anniversaries of that day in Iraq, she drove out to the cemetery where Bravo 17's fallen were buried. She laid flowers on each grave, whispering names under her breath. "You're not forgotten," she told them. "You live in every hand I held, every child born, every tomorrow that came because we refused to stop." Back at the diner, she hung a small wooden sign above the door. Its letters were carved by a local craftsman, polished until they gleamed. "In this diner, we respect all scars, seen and unseen." And the people who came inside knew she meant it. Children who grew up hearing her story brought their own children years later, pointing to the photograph on the wall. Veterans stopped on long drives just to drink a cup of coffee poured by the woman they'd heard about in mess halls and training sessions. And Maria, though she never grew comfortable with praise, learned to accept the gratitude with grace. Late at night, when the last lights of the diner dimmed and she sat alone in the blue checkered booth, she thought of the long road behind her. She thought of the fire, the pain, the years of silence. She thought of the cruel words spoken once in this very room, words that had tried to reduce her to something small. And she thought of the river of gratitude that had followed, the countless lives that had returned to remind her that no scar is meaningless when it carries love, sacrifice, and memory. Her life had become proof that dignity can outlast cruelty, that strength is not the absence of wounds, but the courage to live with them. Maria Torres never called herself a hero. She never needed to. Her legacy lived not in headlines or medals, but in every tomorrow she had made possible. Scars are not endings. They are beginnings written in flesh, reminders of the moments when we were tested and chose to rise. Maria's story shows us that no mark should ever be hidden in shame, because each one carries the weight of survival, of love, of futures protected. So let this story stay with you. Let it remind you to look at others with compassion, to recognize that behind every scar is a story worth hearing. And if it moved you, if you felt even a spark of what those Marines felt when they lined up at dawn, then carry it forward. Follow along for more stories like this. Leave a comment, share your thoughts, press like, because every time we honor these voices, we keep alive the truth that scars are not weakness. They are proof of life.